Hello and welcome to Conversations at Hub101.Earth. My name is Yuejia and I'm the founder and managing director of Hub101.Earth, which is an open access global platform for knowledge sharing and capacity building around climate, nature and environmental topics. Today marks the beginning of what is to be a very busy London Climate Action Week 2026, and I am delighted to have Charlotte Streck joining me from Climate Focus. Morning, Charlotte.
Good morning. I'm delighted to be here. A very hot London Climate Week.
Absolutely, yeah. I hope we get to beat the sweat for the rest of the week. But so lovely to see you in town. I know we've seen each other many times over the years, and I always thought, oh gosh, I really need to grab Charlotte and sit down and have a chat. And I'm so glad we get to do this. So we have lots to talk about, and perhaps we can just start by. I know you are the co-founder and director of Climate Focus, which is an impact-driven company helping to combat climate change and drive sustainable development. Maybe you can tell me a bit about Climate Focus. What is it that you do, and what got you started in it?
So Climate Focus is a consultancy with a strong think tank component, and we work on climate solutions with a focus on the global south. So all kind of climate finance, policy, implementation solutions that are based on cooperation between the global north and the global south, and look to mobilize financing for climate solutions with a particular emphasis on nature. Because of course, nature, land system, agriculture is absolutely essential, not only for the climate, but also for human development. And Climate Focus is, we are about 50 people based in the Netherlands, where there's our head office, Berlin, this is where I'm based now, Washington, DC, and Bogota. All kind of very, very interdisciplinary international team, working across these 4 offices.
No, that's amazing. I know because I've heard of you for many years ago. And in fact, when did you start Climate Focus? 20 years ago?
Yes, we started end of 2024. So we are coming close to the 22nd birthday. Quite a long time, but it went by pretty fast, I think, yes.
Well, so we'll come back a bit more to your specific work now and what your focus is. But just to understand, so what has been your professional career leading up to that point? And, how did you get into it? What triggered that passion for climate, nature, and development issues?
Okay, that's, I'm quite old, so that's a long story. But I started, I was in my teenage years in the 1980s. And this is the time, or it was the time, when the big environmental problems first showed in the headlines of major news outlets. And so I remember till today, the cover of a big German magazine, about the burning Earth. I remember the ozone hole. I remember the first coverage of biodiversity loss, and it deeply affected me, as things can only affect teenagers. So I don't think we have ever, later in our life, we become, we develop a skin, that protects us against all kind of news. But when I was 15, this was, it hit me hard, and it determined my professional career. I didn't really know what to do and how to get to a job that works on environmental issues. So I did the first thing that came to mind, and I started biology. So I studied biology, and
this was in Germany.
That was in Germany, yes. But then I realized, biology is, if you do basic science, you spend, years and years in a lab to publish every 5 years a paper that another 8 people read. So this is, I want to have something that is a bit more maybe impact driven. So then I studied law. also in Germany, in Berlin. And then I realized if I do environmental law, then I sit there and I work on administrative issues, on permitting of big construction sites, and work on compensation measures. So also not what I wanted to do. So I came to realize that the way I can combine the two, the desire to do something and create impact, and nature, by working more in the international and the national field. And I started working did an internship in an NGO in Washington, D.C., Center for Environmental Law, and then I started with the World Bank. The World Bank, so we are now at end of the 1990s. There were not many people working on climate change back then. And there were very few people that had anything on their CV that could qualify them. So my combination of biology and law somehow was enough, covering the fact that I had, really, my English was poor. I didn't have the international experience. So I don't come from a family with UN people. So I got in there, and for the first 6 months felt like I'm a big imposter. I don't understand anything. I don't understand what they want from me. But then I guess I learned quickly. Or I had to. It's just with this, I always, I would always encourage young people to leave their comfort zone. Because there's, try, if you have a dream, if you want to do something, just try it and don't overthink it. Sometimes when I now see my students, they have a lot of concerns, and they tend to be, anticipating failure without even trying. And my experience is, just try it and it will work out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's so interesting, because many of our audience and the target and audience are young people. They have so much potential to learn and do better than our generation in a way, and just grab solutions by the thorn and do something about it. But yeah, there's also a lot of risk aversion going on in terms of making what would be seen sort of off the normal ramp choices, which is unfortunate. We should definitely take more opportunities to make a difference. And so that's so funny, because I also I tried to study neuroscience to start, and then at some point I realized I'd be very much, which is very fascinating, but I'd still be focusing on each single individual organism, whereas the whole Earth is getting into trouble. So I switched to economics. I don't know how much
very
good
similar.
that did. Yeah. I don't know how much good that did, but just thinking about our whole social political system, and that can make a huge difference to so many people. But so that's wonderful to hear. And so then coming back to your career then since.
First, maybe, let's take one step back. I started working at the World Bank in 2000, and enjoyed the mission, the people, they're very bright people, solution oriented, to work with the Global South. And I had fantastic 5 years, which definitely, together with my studies of law and biology, determined my career. Because until today, I'm approaching climate and nature investment from the angle of development concerns and investments in the Global South. So this is, until today, it is also the focus of climate focus. And I do feel, or I strongly feel, we should not lose the international and global aspect of climate change. I think it's important to stress this, particularly at the moment, because we go through a moment where everything is renationalizing and getting, smaller in our thinking. And while I think this is problematic for many, many reasons, it is definitely not the way how we should approach finding solutions for the climate crisis. So, but that goes back, to I started working on climate change. I started working on biodiversity as a World Bank lawyer. But after 5 years, I got maybe a bit more entrepreneurial than fits into a big bureaucratic organization. So I felt I wanted to have more agency, and I needed to decide a bit more for myself. And I'm not particularly risk averse. So it's always, if you in a big organization, you are safe, but you have less agency. The trade-off is, you take more risk and you are more vulnerable economically, but you have more agency if you go out. And on my side, it is definitely, I'm definitely the entrepreneurial type. So that's when I founded Climate Focus together with a Dutch partner, Adrian Korters, who called me one day in the World Bank and said, do you want to set up a company with me? And I said fairly quickly yes, without realizing that relationship is one that is so strong in a way, and it's so hard to undo it, much harder than divorce. So it is, but I was another example for just jump into the cold water and you will be rewarded. Another example of not overthinking. And so we founded Climate Focus in 2024 in Rotterdam in the Netherlands.
Wow. And then, 22 years on, so what would you say in terms of all these areas that you're focused on, which is climate, global south, development issues, and nature? How have you, as channeling through Climate Focus, how have you tried to push for change through your consultancy work?
Yeah, there are different strategies and different venues that must be complementary, and they must be synergistic and work together. And over the last 22 years, we have tried all different ones. So one is you work on policy development. Mm-hmm. So you work with governments on the national implementation of climate laws, of incentives for private sector investment in nature, in climate solutions, in sustainable agriculture, but you take a government lens. That lens, of course, had also different governance level. You have it at the local level, you have it at the national level, and the international level. But essentially, what the driver is to think that the rules need to be right for things to happen. But then you also one realizes the limitations of rules. The limitations are very obvious, where we have governments that are not interested in climate change or setting rules that really help to decarbonize and ensure sustainable livelihoods in the rural areas. But you also realize that in many countries, rules have limited reach. So there are parts, and in particular, if you work on nature-based solutions, there are just large parts of this world where there is very limited institutionality on the ground. So whatever good rules are in capitals, it never reaches the people really, and it's not by a lack of will; it is more the lack of the institutions. So that's when I turn again, looking at civil society and the private sector, because the private sector can reach these areas, and civil society normally is present in these areas where the government is not. And private sector investment is also faster, it's more nimble, it can overcome some of the barriers that policy-driven approaches can't. But then, of course, the private sector is looking for a profit-driven, has a profit-driven interest. And then the third pillar is then philanthropies, large NGOs that are supported by public or private sources, but approach these problems from a non-profit angle. And they are also important because there are just some things that we need to do and some investment that need to be made that will not yield a return. And only if these three work hand in hand, we see change. And also all experience tell us, where, for example, deforestation went down, looking in Brazil or where we have other examples where we have success stories. It is normally when these three things came together, a strong civil society, a private sector ready to invest, and a rules-based framework. Unfortunately, this is often not the case. And then one works either with the public sector or the private sector or the NGOs. And I must also admit that if and when I work too much with the public sector, then at some point I get very frustrated with governments in general. I also don't make a difference between, north and south and west and east. The governments, are frustrating all across the world. But then you work with the private sector, and that for a moment gives you a kick, because you say, hey, things are working.
More efficient.
Yeah, more efficient, and decisions are being made. But then there is a sobering moment there too, because you then realize what the private sector is not caring about, what the private sector is not investing in. And that is then when you think, we need the policies. And that's when I turn to the public sector again. But so over the last years, and it is also, you see, over the last 20 years, we had moments when climate was higher on the agenda and when it was lower on the agenda. And when it is in the moment when it's lower, you just need to see who is still there, who is ready to invest in change. And then the alliances are quite different than in the moments when, we fly high. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, those three segments are so important in interlocking and yeah, they all have their own goals and objectives, which are quite different. And yeah, how when they do come together, it can be amazing. But the challenge is to get everyone to row in the same direction, which it can be really challenging. And so then, if you were to think about, what are you've identified some of the big problems, which is when people don't row in the same direction and other priorities take place. What do you think are some of the opportunities that we can really tap into for nature or for climate, for development? Is there anything that's on the top of your mind now that you say we should be focusing on?
I think what really helps is also psychologically, it helps to take a global view. If you are too much trapped in your own little world, it can be very depressing and frustrating in bad times. If you take a broader view, you see, even now when we have, let's say in the US or Europe, we see a deprioritizing of climate, to say mildly. But in other parts of the world, it is still, there's still a lot going on. So now the opportunity at the moment is certainly in Asia. Asia continues to invest a lot of money and a lot of resources in climate. It has to a certain degree replaced, European and other Western investors. So this is where the interesting things happening are, in Singapore, in Korea and Japan, but also certainly pushed by the massive investments of China in renewable energy. Then, of course, climate is an absolutely cross-cutting issue, biodiversity as well. So where climate in itself may not be a priority, food security certainly is. Sustainable agriculture is, because adaptation is absolutely essential, because we just need to go out here now in London. It is far too hot for the season. And we are pretty much sheltered because we are now in an air-conditioned room. Other people don't have that luxury. So adaptation, including, cooling solutions, but also adaptation in agriculture and land system is essential. And adaptation and mitigation and increased harvest or increased profitability in the land systems for the individual farmer needs to go hand in hand anyway. So sometimes, we continue to do similar things, but we put the emphasis a little bit more on, if nobody wants to talk about mitigation, we talk about adaptation, we talk about resilience, we talk about increased resilience in the livelihoods for farmers, for example.
Yeah. No, land. I think our land systems is something that people seem to underappreciate how important it is, and the impact of just not just our food systems, but how we're eating, how we are growing our food, how we're managing our forests, or not so much. All of that really just ties into this storm of like you say, it is so hot this week. Is all these record-breaking temperatures across the world. Really, it's not just a London problem. I can't imagine why anybody would say climate change is not happening, it is not real. Hopefully, those days are gone. Actually, that we continue to debate.
Yeah, we just have to accept that climate change seems to be psychologically a difficult problem to grasp. And in particular, if something is threatening, the human mind, to a certain degree, seems to shut down and say, we don't want to change anything. You go, you go back into, your little comfort zone and don't want to look out and don't want to see the change. So that's, another challenge for politicians to create positive visions, about a future, about a climate resilient future, a nature positive future. And it's very frustrating, I think, sometimes, because we leave too much of narrative to populists, and particularly right-wing populists, that seem to see a threat in everything. And so then for the other parts or other parties or political fractions, it is mostly about a defensive, but they react to a narrative that is provided by the other side. What is missing is a positive, strong, easy to communicate narrative from those that care about people and about nature and about the climate, and really a peaceful, livable future. And this is, I still, I come from Germany, and the auto industry is very, very powerful. It continues to be. And I never understood how it could work that you say, my car is freedom. And this has been the narrative forever, while the reality is you're constantly in traffic jams, it's polluted, you're looking for parking space, you're constantly fined. So it is really a pain. So where what we are looking for in the future is mobility solutions that are healthy, that are fast, that are convenient. And this is just the case with cars. The similar is on nature or on food, so you need to eat meat to be a man. What is that? Where does that come from? So this is also a narrative that is very harmful, and it's harmful for your body, for your health, for the environment. And similarly, I think we need to work really on changed narratives. And there you mentioned at the beginning that I also work with creatives. So I have I do my work for over 20 years, and at some point you realize, you go to conferences, I meet the people that I've been meeting for the last 20 years, and of course we share an outlook, we share philosophy, we share many opinions, but we are also a bubble. And we tend to, in our climate bubble, confirm, we have all understood it, and we know what the problem is, and we know, that's comforting, but it's not solving anything. So we need to step out and talk to other people. And there are different ways you can do it. You can do it via sports, you can do it via the arts, you can do it, with children, very important. It's young people. So wherever you have an environment where people come together and also experience community and something positive. So I have started working with artists for about 12 years ago, I think. We had different projects. The most prominent is called Sinfonia Tropico. This is in Colombia. And in Colombia, we go and go to communities with a history where there is a history of violence and a trauma in the community. And normally what goes hand in hand is a bruised community and a bruised environment. So a trauma for a community and violence translates in violence to nature. There is a strong correlation. So what we do, we go to these places and a little bit like a circus that comes to town. So for 4 or 5 weeks, we go with a group of artists and they work with young people on skill development, but on skill development and narratives around a positive environment. So these places are all, they're incredibly rich in nature. So people, we work with the young people to see their identity linked to this wealth, rather than their identity linked to that trauma of violence. More about the future and the identity around biodiversity and incredible nature. And that is then expressed through composition and dance and painting and podcasts. And then at the end, there's a big show. And over the years, we have connected these different groups of young people. So it's a really nice project.
Yeah.
It's a really nice project.
That's amazing. Yeah. What is it called again? Sorry?
Sinfonia Tropico.
Sinfonia Tropico.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you say, I think it's all connected, how who we are, our communities, nature, the environment that we grow up in. And I think for many of us, we've lost that connection over time, and it's just become more and more unhealthy and unhelpful. So then I think to loop back to nature in terms of what we can do to help preserve and restore nature. In fact, one of my earliest memories of connecting with you was we were on a Zoom call. I think it was in 2021 during lockdown in our various living rooms. I think you were talking about the outcomes of COP16 from Glasgow, 26 from Glasgow, with the Forest Declaration, and also Article 6 was kind of agreed at that point. So I'd love to get your thoughts on what do you think is the role of some of these market-driven forces, for example, carbon markets, in helping nature preservation or restoration, based on what you've seen so far?
So carbon pricing generally is, of course, a policy instrument that prices the bad or rewards the good, in the sense that it attaches a price to carbon emissions. There are emission trading systems, there are carbon taxes, instruments that work in the national context, and we have more and more countries that have emission trading system or carbon taxes. What is interesting in the context of international cooperation are mechanisms that allow to mobilize finance in other countries, particularly in developing countries. And it goes back to the Kyoto Protocol, so the treaty that governed international climate change before the Paris Agreement. There was a mechanism called the Clean Development Mechanism, and it was the only mechanism that included developing countries in the system, into the architecture of the Kyoto Protocol, by allowing companies and countries from the global north to invest in projects that reduce emissions or remove carbon from the atmosphere, credit this environmental benefit, and then account for it for under their goals under the Kyoto Protocol. The successor instrument of this clean development mechanism is under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, similarly a market mechanism that allows countries and private sector to invest in activities, programs, projects, and credit the emission reductions or removals. Now, it is a highly contested mechanism. Anybody who works on carbon markets and in international carbon markets in particular knows, that there have been problems and there are problems around credibility. But I want to say, because, what we see, we have negative press coverage. It's mostly about a very few project classes, particular sort of problems. And it is a flawed mechanism because everything, of course, all mechanisms in a certain degree have their, pros and cons and flaws. However, what I want to say is that these carbon market mechanisms are at the moment the only viable way to mobilize finance in nature or in rural areas in developing countries to promote forest restoration, sustainable agriculture, ecosystem restoration more broadly. And in that sense, we should be, we should certainly always make sure that they work better, but we should appreciate them as a way to mobilize finance.
As a tool.
As a tool.
As a tool, amongst other tools, but a tool that is currently working and certainly will be improved over time. It can be quite a difficult concept, carbon markets, especially under the many different schemes and setups that has emerged over time. What do you think of the Article 6 mechanism in terms of where it can go and where it is at the moment?
Yeah, it is. I agree that carbon markets and these carbon crediting mechanisms are highly complex. We also have created a lot of jargon. Yeah. I also teach at the university climate diplomacy, climate governance, climate finance, and whenever we come to the carbon markets, it's the big challenge for the students. If you only have a few hours to explain this, it's not easy because it has different, all the different aspects, how you generate these credits, how you transfer them, how you use them, and each aspect has its own complications. Article 6. So I think it is only one tool in the toolbox. Maybe these international carbon mechanisms are only a transitionary instrument, because ideally, if we have strong policies and strong incentives and strong, local systems, they may work better, eventually. But we are not there yet. And we go back, to what we talked about earlier, that we need to keep in mind the global aspect of our problem. And it is not something, so the cooperation around climate solution is absolutely essential. I'm totally convinced about this, and it's not a solution. We cannot say, we take a small country, it's Germany. So if Germany goes, with emissions down to 10% of its 1990 levels, that's great, and it's a great model, but it will not solve the problem. It will not solve the problem if we are not at the same time really working this together. And often the scalable and faster emissions are in other parts of the world. And since time matters, and I talk here about the governments and the private sector and civil society, so all three groups need to really work on everything at the same time, and scale it, and not create false decision points like, should we do it at home or should we do it abroad? We should do both. Should we do reductions in emissions, or should we do removals? We should do both. Should we do novel carbon dioxide removal solutions, so engineered ones, or should we do conventionals? We need to do both. And everything where we spend a lot of time with it either or, we just make it easier for those that don't want to do anything to say, you can't even agree on what needs to be done. So the narrative needs to be both. And in this, coming back to Article 6 is the cooperative instrument that allows for cooperation between two countries and private entities to invest in abroad and get credit for this investment. There is a bit of a problem, because there's always a bit of a problem if you have an international mechanism that is governed by some set of UN bodies. It's political, it's slow, and it is bureaucratic. So there is, sometimes one also needs to think, does it make more sense to work in voluntary carbon markets, use local carbon crediting mechanism, or this international mechanism? And that depends. It really depends. But it is one instrument in the toolbox.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said about, just basically everything, everywhere, all at once, like that movie. We just need to push on all fronts, and maybe getting fixated on one particular mechanism only, or one type of solution only, just stalls things at a time when we need to accelerate.
Exactly.
So then, in terms of nature-specific solutions, that things that concerns preservation or restoration, what do you think are the biggest levers that we can pull from either the three, the government, private sector, businesses, and civil society, along either market-based mechanisms? What are the biggest hopes for financing? Is it market-based financing for nature, or again, it depends, right? We're talking very broad.
I think market-based, yes, but it can be a combination of different market mechanisms. So we have pretty good systems already that quantify emission reductions and removals. The problem is if you look at the different project categories, for example, planting trees means that the carbon is absorbed over a long time period. You have a significant upfront finance challenge. Even if you sell the carbon credits, you have an investment challenge. So we need to develop on most likely blended finance solutions that create a pool of funding that makes upfront financing available for nature restoration. And then the valuation can include the carbon credits that are being generated over time, but it's very hard to invest or implement restoration projects just on the basis of carbon. So there needs to be support for this. Biodiversity can also play a role. So we see more activity around biodiversity crediting or bio-crediting. That's, of course, even more challenging than carbon, because biodiversity is so location specific, and it's impossible to create a really fungible unit. But there are attempts to at least value the biodiversity uplift or conservation in certain areas. So that can be stacked. So the two type of credits can be combined. What at the moment is a big bottleneck is that now I talk about European governments and the UK. There are not sufficient demand signals. So what the European Union and its member state, what they tend to do is to support these activities verbally and in political terms, providing even capacity building to countries, doing all kinds of things. But what is really needed is a demand a demand signal for the private sector. And this can be, it can be through linking it to carbon pricing systems, but it could also be fiscal incentives, it could be other regulatory incentives. So the toolbox of governments is big. And in particular, fiscal incentives can go a long way. And that is at the moment missing. And that's probably, and some of it, we did different studies for different countries. Some of these incentives are easy to implement. It would start with a number of proper policy declarations, because what we see at the moment, that industry is very insecure, because where they had invested, they often got a lot of bad press because of greenwashing allegations. And so that has led to an enormous insecurity among private entities that are willing to invest in activities, but they are very insecure about the quality of their investment on one hand, but that is something they normally can assess. But what they can say about it, or whether they can say anything. And at the moment, the result is that for many companies, it's better to do nothing than to invest. And this cannot be the outcome of this whole greenwashing discussion. And here, governments are needed that give clear guidance to companies on what they can say and what is supposed to be a valuable investment into nature.
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's I think the greenwashing allegation, while some of it may have been legitimate, it just kind of stalled this movement in more private sector investment into these issues at the time when we really need it. I know I could really chat to you all week, but I have to let you run off to your very busy Climate Week agenda. Is there any last word that you like to leave us with in terms of your hope for the future, what you'd like to see more this week, walking into Climate Week in London?
So I do think that climate and nature action is non-negotiable. So even if we go through a bit of a difficult time at the moment, it's non-negotiable, it's essential. And in particular to young people, I still think it is a good and, very, very rewarding career choice. It is giving meaning to a career, which is probably the most important for a fulfilled professional life. And we need good people. And I really enjoy the international aspect of our work. And it gives so much hope when you see what happens in other countries. And that can help you to cope with the problems in the immediate proximity of what we are dealing with here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Long-term. And yeah, thank you so much for joining me this morning. And I will be seeing you the rest of this week. I hope you have a wonderful Climate Action Week.
Thank you. And next time I will ask you a lot of questions.
It's a date.
Yeah. So we swap seats.
Yeah, absolutely. Come to see you in Berlin.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.